Hi everyone, welcome to Shaping Your Incident Response Plan webinar. We're here today to discuss everything that has to do with response plan from scratch. But first we can introduce ourselves for a bit. So I'm Tom, I'm virtual CISO here at Cy, and with me there's Amit. Amit, you want to present yourself?
Hi everybody, my name is Amit Levinstein. I'm head of the Cyber Architecture here at Cy, essentially helming the Blue Team, and also Deputy CISO of Cy today.
So today we're going to discuss why do you need a response plan, besides the obvious. But the main key message that we want you to take from here is this is something you cannot win. It doesn't just happen. And the main message is incident is chaos, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when disaster strikes, it strikes, right? There are a lot of different components, a lot of different stakeholders inside during an incident, and simply it's if you're not prepared for it, if you don't know exactly who's supposed to be doing what and how, then it's going to be very hard for you to effectively respond and perhaps even prolonging your recovery time.
Exactly. And it's not only the who's doing what, we'll talk about the different stages and different phases, but it's constructing your organization to be prepared and to be able to conduct any kind of activity against such an incident, a crisis. We'll talk about the differences in a second. So we're speaking about not only the creation, but the implementation, the testing, the drilling, and providing your organization essentially a technical and procedural overview of what should be, how that should look like when things happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are a lot of different considerations to take into account, whether you're using third-party vendors, you might be using your own IR teams, and there are a lot of, as I mentioned before, a lot of different components here. You need to make sure they are very tightly bound together if you are to respond effectively. And so the idea behind it is today to kind of review the different um, steps, if you will, and different prerequisites you should take into account when designing an incident response plan and how to make it the most effective. Do note we are not going to be very technical. We are not going to delve into forensics and so on. That's not the idea here. The idea is to strategically look on how to cope with an incident or with a crisis, or how exactly you should respond to it, and how you should really prepare your organization for an attack or for instance.
Exactly. So I think, Amit, maybe first of all, before we dive into the response plan itself, we can make some distinctions between what's an incident, what's a crisis. And the first thing that we want to highlight is an incident can lead to a crisis, which is the obvious, but it's something that people sometimes tend to forget because we're handling with an incident, something that the guys, your SOC, your deputy CISO, your IT guys, they're investigating, but we need to understand when do we turn it into a crisis? What's the benchmark that we want to define in order to make it into a crisis? What's the goal here?
Yeah, and I mean, this is also part of the first chapters I like to put inside incident response plan, the definitions chapter, if you will, so everybody will be aligned with different concepts that you're using when preparing your plan. So definitely, an incident and a crisis are two different things. Incident can be very tactical. It can affect only specific crown jewels or specific accounts or assets, and an incident is something that really affects that has a very high impact on your organization. Again, it really depends on the type of the organization. If you are, for instance, a software developing company, it's one thing. Then you want to protect your assets. However, if if you have a production facility, then your assets are in fact your assembly lines or your production lines and so on and so forth, or your SCADA environment and whatnot. So
we're saying that
really
the main thing is to define, like, what are we facing against? Like, what's the threat that we will be facing? And this changes, as you said, with an OT environment, IT environment. Do I have a factory? Do I have my business as maybe online selling? So I need to keep my website online all the time. So keeping in mind in the premise of a work plan, what are we facing against?
Yep, I agree completely. Also, when you think about how to describe what's an incident, what's a crisis for your organization, then there are different factors you can take into consideration. For more business impact perspective, you have the legal, reputation, and financial. Even you can create specific criteria for each one, and also of course there's the technical oriented factors, which essentially is the scope and the time of the outage. I would say the scope or the amount of data leaked in I don't know, in terabytes or gigabytes. Again, it really depends on the organization. But the point being is that you need to kind of list all the different criteria and then decide, okay, this criteria are relevant for my organization. This will be a crisis if this and that happen in that magnitude, and all others are incident. It's also really relevant for when you're considering severity, for instance.
Yeah, so the severity should be led by the business impact. So how severe the business impact in regards to my ability to function with that specific incident, that will define if it's a crisis or not.
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely.
Yeah. All right. So that's the basic premise that we're coming with. The main ground levels that we want to set in order to construct something.
Yeah. Additionally, I would also consider, the different type of incidents that you might have, might cope with.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, you can also generate a list like that. It really depends again on the type of industry. What do you consider as threat actors for your organizations? I mean, it's one thing to deal with cyber criminals and whole other things dealing with an IPT set. So yeah, you need to kind of prepare the different scenarios you might face with. Also, it's really relevant for the playbooks you're going to generate later on. But essentially, you need to have like an overview of what are you going to prepare, which kind of incidents, and then take it into account going forward.
Yeah, so we're saying that naturally you cannot have a playbook for everything, but the main thing that you're coming with is know what are the most common scenarios that you will be facing that might be, let's say, the ones that you'll be facing against, and have them ready as a playbook. So have that base that you can work with that will cover most of the scenarios that you will be facing.
Yep. I mean, some or most organizations will, for instance, consider ransomware as a scenario they're going to cope with, but some might, the ones specifically living on SaaS solution, for instance, might deem it less relevant to their organization. So it's really important to understand again what are the challenges.
Cool. So we can move forward to the main framework that we'll be working in, I guess. The main overview that we will be looking at when we want to see how do we design a work plan, or how do we design something that will lead to us being able to prepare properly to an incident and respond to it in a way that is efficient and hits the mark. So maybe we can go through one by one, and afterwards we'll go deep inside it.
Yeah, okay. So for the framework, well, it's worth mentioning that we are using NIST 861, which is very common for handling incidents. There are a lot of different frameworks. You can use whatever works for you. But essentially, this is what we are gonna use for this webinar. So we have, I would say, three main stages. There's the preparation stage, obviously. This is exactly what we are discussing. We are on this stage. And then there's the whole incident-oriented stage, which contains detect and analysis, the containment itself, of course, how you are going to eradicate an incident, and finally, how do you plan on recovering. And at the last stage, you have the post-incident action items, and the report, the lesson learned, the different mitigation you're going to perform on your network, and so on. So this is the base structure. We are not going to review each and single stage in terms of what's happening on each stage, but we're gonna look at what you need to prepare in context to that stage, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we can't. Naturally, it's you can write books on each of these stages, and it's a huge subject by itself. But as you said, I mean, the goal here for us will be to get you aligned with what you need to have prepared in order to be able to function properly in each of these stages. Yeah. Cool. So let's go for the first one. So, how to prepare to be prepared? It's kind of a paradoxical question, but we can divide it into three lanes and one action. So the first one, as always, it's all about the people. So we can start there. So naturally, if you have systems, a lot of infrastructure that you created, and you don't have the skills to operate them, so most times we see systems that are coming into play with different organizations, but people don't actually know how to use them properly, or how to max out what they can give the organization. So the first thing we want to highlight for you is training. Make sure that your people are trained and aware of the different systems that you have in place, the system that you implemented. Naturally, people change. There's maybe loss of knowledge. So from the preparation perspective to an incident, having these abilities in line in your organization is crucial.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Tom. I mean, I've seen many organizations that have multiple platforms, multiple security solutions, and that's great. I mean, that's awesome. But you need to have the expertise on utilize those systems. You could have the best XDR in the world, EDR doesn't matter. But if nobody knows how to hunt using that EDR, if nobody knows how to isolate this EDR, that doesn't help you, right?
No.
I mean, it might help you, but not as much if your personnel are very proficient with those systems.
Yeah, and we see this all the time, right? We see people organizations that are confident in themselves because they know they invested the budget and they have this very edge system in place already implemented because the vendor did a great work, but they don't have anyone that can operate it in the level that is expected in order to produce the value that they want to have, right?
Yeah. Also, having a responsible, specific employee is crucial because I mean, you might be using an MDR solution, right, to manage the defense and detect and response solution, and that's okay, that's fine, that makes sense. But still, you need to have someone in your organization who's responsible for the system and make sure it works, it's in an operational state and can really interact with your vendor. Basically, this is really super important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen, by the way, from a security perspective, not necessarily an incident perspective, I've seen, as you mentioned, Tommy, organizations that have solutions in place, but they are not really effective. They have gaps in their capabilities. They have gaps in the scope and coverage of the organization because no one is responsible for that system. That's also could be a big problem when you're facing an incident.
Couldn't agree more. The second thing in the people perspective is R&R, so roles and responsibilities. We'll talk a bit more about that, but having this who does what thing connects to what we initiated with Amit, that an incident is usually chaos. And without a clear definition on who does what and who has the hands on the steering wheel, just things goes, I think, sideways very fast, and something that could be averted and something that we could have minimized the damage becomes into a massive full-on crisis, right?
Yeah, most definitely. There are so many ways things can go wrong if people don't know exactly what is expected of them. For instance, imagine that there's an internal communication to your organization about an incident, and then those employees go out and share that knowledge publicly. Then suddenly your internal incident is exposed to the world, and you need to provide answers. So you really need to make sure that everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing, what are their responsibilities, what they shouldn't be doing, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, even more
very, very
important, what they should not be doing. Correct. Where does their responsibility begin and where it ends?
I agree. I agree. By
All
the
right.
way,
So we have.
another thing. Sorry, Tom.
No, go ahead.
Another aspect of this, I would say, of the R&R. Sometimes, I mean, many organizations have physical sites across the world, right? So they have the HQ where usually they have security, the global security team over there, the
Usually it's
global IT,
right.
and then you also have the sites. Now that's always kind of tricky. How do you manage the sites? It's not the topic of our webinar. We can have a specific webinar on that. But from an incident perspective, when something happens, you need to know you can work with someone from the other side, from the other site, that you know who you should address to, and who's available, and when, and how to get a hold of them. So, and sometimes this could be also critical assets. For instance, HQ doesn't really, it doesn't have to sit with your production facility, right? But if something happens, you need to know how to interact with your personnel on that production facility. So this is also something to keep in mind.
True. We need to be able to use them as a proxy for us in the, let's say, out there in the site and activate them accordingly. Because if not, the security team by itself is incapable of managing a global type of organization. We need people on the ground. So completely, yes. As you said as well, system specialists. If I have an incident in my SAP system or something that I don't know who to go to with one of my critical systems, then I am inherently delaying the response. And if I'm delaying the response, I'm making the impact bigger and bigger. So it's definitely something to have in mind and something to keep updating all the time. It needs to have a very, very defined structure on how this list of people or how these procedures are kept for years and not for months or weeks, because this tends to go or maybe be a bit overlooked when time goes by and people change and maybe systems change, and the security team might not be in the loop because they don't need to be in the loop all the time, but they need to be proactive and have people update them as well, because as we said, that is one of the keys to be able to respond.
Yeah. And also, we can give an example for it, right? And let's say I like taking the OT example because it's always more what's it complicated or more interesting to handle an OT environment because
Yeah.
you have that extra layer of impact. But in any case, probably the security team will not know how to handle SCADA solution or HMIs and so on and so forth. You have to have those specific stakeholders who are very proficient with their systems in order to make sure while in an incident. Or another example, if you have old school mainframes, AS400 and so on, not a lot of people know how to deal with those systems, even from a hardware perspective. You must have those people by your side during an incident, and they need to know what is expected of them if you are to respond well for those kind of events on those systems. So system specialists from a business perspective is important.
Moving forward to the procedures. So here, naturally, we can talk, this whole conversation can be only about procedures, but we want to highlight one main message that will be critical in your preparation stages. And that is, what happens when things actually succeed? So I can have an anti-phishing system, I can have a DDoS protection system, I can have a lot of different technologies, but we want to be able not only to rely on the tech, but we want to know what happens when that fails. So what happens when things actually succeed, when the DDoS actually happens, when the phishing actually manages to go through and the people hit on the link. So having these procedures on how do we act upon a successful attack, is critical, because without that, your people will be crippled in what to do next, because they only knew how to create the system to defend against it, but now that it actually happened, they don't know what to do. So having that playbook in place can also give you the heads up in reacting faster.
I mean, generally speaking, this is correct for each and any other stages within your IRP, in your incident response plan. You need to know how to triage and what are the criteria for the triage. You need to understand how to engage with your vendors and so on and so forth. There are many procedures to take into account, and it's relevant for each and every stage. And yeah, you're completely right. I mean, consider a successful phishing attempt, right? So even if it's not something very big, there should be a very clear procedure on how you should address a successful phishing campaign, right? From how do you analyze it? How do you verify if other people click the URL or
what's the damage? Maybe credentials. Maybe there's something that is. Yeah.
Yep. So you have to know how to do those things, and you need procedures. And keep in mind, some things will catch you again. Not all incidents come every day, right? So your security personnel might not be very drilled on that. So having a procedure that really, I explain what exactly you need to be doing and how goes a long way during an incident and makes it things a little bit less chaotic.
Moving to the technology realm, and here also we can talk forever about this, but the key message here is, if you don't have the capabilities, and we'll give an example in a second, if you don't have a capability to defend against something, implementing it as you go will be virtually impossible. And I think the most maybe clear example in this regard is DDoS. So being able to defend yourself against DDoS is not a matter of procedures, it's not a matter of people, it's a matter of having the right technology implemented from the get-go. And this connects, to what we discussed in the beginning about mapping the threats. So if I didn't have this threat mapped out, and when I laid the ground for my response plan or for my organization, I won't know that I need to implement it. And if I won't implement it when it happens, I will be defenseless, and I will need to reach out to maybe different agencies to be able to maybe calm it down. But I won't be able to eliminate it completely. So I will be defenseless.
Yeah, that's very true. Pursuing your ISP provider to get DDoS protection when you have an incident, trust me, it's not. It's not ideal. Also from a financial perspective, yes, I don't say that each vendor does that, but vendors can take advantage if you are in a tight spot. So keep in mind.
Then we pay.
Yeah, and also from a technical perspective, it's not only the defenses, right? I mean, it's really how you can you respond to an incident in a way that, do you know how to contain an incident? Do you have the capability to contain an incident? I mean, you can contain incident in many ways. We're going to discuss it in a second. But that's also something you need to make sure that you have the capabilities, you know how to do so from a procedural perspective, and you have the people who can do that. So, I mean, everything we just discussed, people, procedure, and technology is kind of key for everything we are going to discuss forward.
Yeah.
And for each in every stage, you always need to think on those three vectors, if you will.
True. The last thing that we'll touch upon in the preparation stage is drilling and testing. We'll talk about it in a second on which elements should be tested and which elements should be drilled, but without actually going about and trying to see if it works and using resources, yes, wasting resources of the organization. Also in the C-levels, executive, board of directory, everyone needs to be aligned and spend the resources on seeing that we know how to do things. Sometimes people avoid saying, yeah, but we won't waste their time on it, or they won't invest that much time on doing the actual drills. But without it, you will just arrive to the incident or to the crisis and won't know what to do. So that's the difference.
Yep, I completely agree. It starts from a technical level, test and drill your sub teams, your security operation team, and so on, and moves down the ladder up until up the ladder. I mean up until the strategic level of your C-level executives. They need to know who's sponsoring an incident, who again R&Rs and so on. So it's very critical. And sometimes doing tabletops exercise. Um, you know, you learn stuff. You understand a lot of things that you might have not even into consideration before that. So
Maybe
again, these
we'll
are
start with what the tabletop, just to give the explanation to the term. A tabletop is when you conduct a full-on simulation of an incident, of a crisis, to your board of directors, to your C-levels, and they need to say in front of everyone, what are we going to do with specific incidents or specific examples of an unfolding incident that you're presenting. So it's giving them live, maybe most tangible that you can find, scenario in which they have to react into a reality that they're meeting. So it's something that is, I would say it's unreplaceable, unless you have a proper incident and then they're seeing it firsthand. But the way to prepare them, that's the way.
all right. So I suggest we'll move a little bit forward. Keep in mind that the base principles that you just discussed, the people, processes, and technology, are relevant for all of the stages. You need to take it into account. Always, we'll give a few examples of some of those. But when you write down your plan, think in those terms and see if you are covered by each one of those vectors.
So let's start with the first one, right? The detection and analysis. That's the first stage that we have according to the NIST, besides the preparation, of course. So the first thing is to understand, what do I detect today? So what do I have? According to the first that I listed out, according to the different elements that I want to defend against, what are my capabilities now, present time? So Amit, maybe you can give us a bit of an overview with the triage.
Yeah, so the triage is a process where the first responder should understand what he's facing with and kind of set the severity as accurate as can be in that stage. So those are essentially the personnel who will come first, will have first contact with the incident, and then according to the different procedures and the different severities and so on, they will categorize the incident, categorize the current severity, and escalate it to the relevant personnel. And from a detection perspective, you really need to know what kind of alerts you're going to get and what alerts you are not going to get. And then you should have a triage for that process, meaning that you might have some systems you cannot detect for some reason. Maybe they're old, maybe you don't have an agent on it, and so on and so forth. So it's going to be probably coming from a user, and then you need to know which questions you should cover when getting a report from a user, and so on and so on. So this is the base details on the triage process. And then from a detection capabilities standpoint, there are many different systems and solutions and infrastructure and whatever that you need to review. And so this you have to understand what you have and what you don't, and to prepare getting reports or what kind of other controls you can use to kind of cover it as much as possible.
In case you don't have. Yeah, but we can maybe talk about the maybe most dominant way that we're seeing right now in the market to be able to even know what you have. Because if I'll send my analysts or the SOC guys or my IT guys and I'll tell them, guys, let me know what we don't have right now, or let me know what we have right now. this introspection of us reflecting on ourselves is always non-accurate. It can be accurate to some extent. We'll have maybe 80%, 30% of what we do have, but we'll be missing quite a bit. So our solution for it is purple teaming, is having someone from the outside doing live attacks, and you're seeing, do I have it? Do I not? And it's a very 0 and 1, very binary type of approach of, did I identify this attack? Have I identified it to the extent I should be identifying it? For example, if it's something that is very critical, like a DC sync, have I identified that a DC sync took place? If so, to what level? Do I just have the log? Do I have an alert? Is my alert also in the emails and the phones? Did I have a certain automation to inform everyone who's relevant according to the R&R that this took place? And this is the main tool that you can use, and there's no better way, as I said, but to test things out. Don't be afraid of putting things to the test. It's part of improvement. You cannot improve unless you know what you have, and what you have in an honest way.
Definitely. And also keep in mind, if you have an external SOC partner, that's obviously fine, but you need to take it into consideration in regards to your incident response. So that's key, because if you're overlooking that, then you might excuse me, then you might be overlooking a very critical component here for your IRP. You need to know how to interact with them. You need to know what are you getting from them, what systems are they covering, which systems are they don't, and what is the current coverage, what is the SLA. There's so many different elements you need to keep into account. And so you have to kind of acknowledge this is the current situation and see how it interacts with your plan.
And I'll add, I mean, are you completely right? I'll add here that a lot of MSSP providers that we've seen throughout the years, and we're seeing more and more organizations go there, which is fine. We're seeing that it's more trending to go there in terms of a budget, in terms of making usage of skills. It's fine, but a lot of organizations are unique, and they have unique type of logs. Maybe they have unique type of systems, and you need to make sure that you're not only sending the log, but they know how to process them. And you're the user here. You're the provider. You're the one who is buying the service, and you should be making sure that your guys, the MSSP guys, the external SOC that you're working with, know how to handle what you're sending them. Because if not, it's a futile. It won't produce anything.
Agreed. Finally, I would say two other aspects we should discuss is the forensic analysis capabilities. This is something that normally doesn't exist internally or in-house in the organization. For obvious reasons, it's really time-consuming, and you need to have specific skill sets for it and dedicate personnel. So again, if you have a vendor here, really keep that in mind, that you need to understand what kind of SLA you're getting, how you're interacting, and with whom, in what cases are you going to approach to that vendor. So this needs to be very clear, very well aligned with all the relevant stakeholders in your organization. And if you have that capability in-house, that's amazing, good for you. But in any case, this is something you need to make sure. Can I do that? Am I capable of understanding the scope of an attack in my organization? If not, how am I achieving that with partners or other abilities?
Yeah, maybe we can address it in a very granular way. So there are things that are more complicated that I know, and we'll speak about that in a second, with being honest or being able to reflect on what we can do in a very straightforward way. But when it comes to forensic analysis, we can take the base of the common, more simple things that can be done and construct this in-house. But the rest of it, have something lined up that once you need it, it's on the go. An external vendor, an IR team, someone that can help you once you need it.
Mm-hmm.
The last topic, we touched upon it a bit before, but we want to stress it more. If you won't construct a playbook, what needs to be done, it won't be done. Or it will be done, but half or 70% of it. It won't be to the extent that you want it to be, and things will fall between the cracks for sure. There's not even a question. And it doesn't matter how good your IR team or how good your SOC team or you have an IT guy who is the best. It's about making sure that we're comprehensive in the way that we are addressing incidents or investigations for that matter. So having these very straightforward playbooks, there's no replacement for it.
Yep, and then also they are very detailed. Some of them are very technical. Again, just streamlining everything you need to do and take into account while you have that specific incident. We're not going to cover all of those different playbooks, but yeah, there's a big variety of those, and this is to be prepared as part of the plan.
Second thing is containment. So an incident happened, you've detected it either through your systems or through your user. It doesn't matter for that matter for right now. But the first thing we want to be able to do is break the incident. And from a preparation perspective, as we said, having the ability to isolate, for example, components or VLANs, or to even work together as an organization and make sure that we know how to make that work and keep the business going. For example, we need to isolate a segment that is also connecting the factory or the business that needs to run with different orders. How to do that in a way that will keep us running is key, because without that, you cannot break the incident in a way that will keep you going, and you will inherently damage your ability to create something that will continue.
Yeah, and it all boils down to the same three vectors that we mentioned before: people, processes, and technology. Technology, you need to know how to do it. I mean, that you have the capabilities of doing so. For instance, can your EDR isolate a device from the network? If you have a NAC solution, can you use it to isolate the VLAN? How do you connect your remote access or your site-to-site VPN and so on? So you need to know what you have and how you can use it. You need to have a procedure for it. It should be very clear. You don't want to start messing around during an incident. You should know exactly how you are going to isolate. It should be very clear, because this is an ace up your sleeve, and you're kind of putting it on the table as soon as it happens, as soon as you need it, right? And also the responsibility for doing the containment itself, it needs to be very clear,
Yeah.
unless you want to have a bigger incident potentially on your hands. If somebody does something that you shouldn't, for instance, blocking the production VLAN entirely, that doesn't make sense unless somebody knows when to do it, or somebody has decided to do so from a strategic level.
It
And
leads us
also
to the second question. So second, let's say, something to think about, right? Of what is the benchmark? Like, I've worked with an organization before that they had a SOC guy that had an incident on his hand. He knew that something is happening in one of the sites, but he was so afraid to do any action that will limit that site, because he was afraid that it will be blamed on him because he did something not in order, or he did something that is very, let's say, over the top over this incident. So having this very straightforward benchmark on your analyst identified something, great. He needs to report it to the deputy CISO or to the CISO or to the head of the SOC. It doesn't matter, but it needs to be very clear on when do we do something that intervenes with your network or intervenes with the normal functions that we've been experiencing until now. And without that, it's very easy to fall in this, I don't want it to be my fault that we've done something that damages the business. So it's a very thin line here that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, as I mentioned, it should be very clearly defined, no questions about it. And also keep in mind, if you have vendors from any kind who address some parts of your network, for your firewalls and networking, even an MDR service, then you need to understand what's the SLA on their response, on their containment response, and how fast they can do it. How are you even asking them to do so? Are you opening the ticket and waiting for a response? Can you call someone? What's the SLA on it? This needs to be very clearly aligned. You don't want to be in a position where you have to drop your site-to-site connections in order for a malware not to spread to your data center, and you just can't do it because you have no one from the other side, from your vendor side, doing that. So this is so important. Again, I've seen different incidents where things were not aligned, and then this is exactly what happened. So keep that in
Yeah,
mind.
yeah, I agree with you completely. I'm seeing this all the time. Organizations that don't have a defined SLA with their contractor, with the vendors, and we see this all the time that they are waiting for a
Yep,
response from the other side.
and it could be too late. Yeah.
Yeah, it usually is. It usually is. We are defining a legal structured SLA that is anchored in a contract.
Yep.
I think we've covered this to some extent, but we can reiterate it again. Who and when to do the actual containment, as we said, is
Yeah.
critical, because if you have one
We
guy
really think
working from
so.
that one working from that end, it creates a mess.
Yep. And again,
And the last,
just reminding here, if you have people on site, if you have remote sites, then you really need to know who you can work with during an incident. You might be sitting in the HQ, but you have sites around the world. You have to know who's your go-to guy, who's the team who's going to handle an incident on site, how fast you can get there if you need to be there, and so on. So that's also part of a kind of a procedural side or people side of containment. because sometimes there's no way around it. You want someone to come and pull the plug out, So it's also something you need to take into account.
The last thing that we have here, as we said in the last one, playbooks. Make sure you know how to do it and who to do it. As we said, it needs to be very tactical and very, let's say, very straightforward.
Yeah. All right. So moving on, how you're going to eradicate an incident. Of course, it's super important to understand if you can even do so. And you mentioned before, Tom, that honesty is key with yourself, with your organization. You need to understand what really are your capabilities from all the perspective, technical perspective, people perspective. Verifying that you don't have any vectors somewhere. There's so many ways of doing that, or be able to analyzing a file and then hunt it throughout your organization, or kind of review different persistence capabilities. I mean, this is very high end stuff, right? So that's fine. If you're not able to do so, that's fine. Have some vendor, some good vendor, be on your side during the incident and have him do that. That's perfectly fine. But don't ignore that because you don't know how to do that.
Yeah, I think here I can add that sometimes we perceive our IT guys or the SOC guy or the security guy that I have in my organization as very good, right? He's been around for 5, 10 years. He knows his way around. He's very skilled in what he does. But we need to keep in mind that these functions are not necessarily related to the day-to-day of being a security guy or an IT guy. And they are very much corresponding with a specialist's ability to eradicate a file or eradicate malware or analyze something, and to make sure that it has been, let's say, eliminated completely. And being able to know that you've concluded your eradication phase is a skill set. Don't get it wrong.
Definitely. I agree completely. Yep.
Okay, the recovery is pretty much same as the eradication. Being honest with yourself, knowing, can I recover on my own? Do I need a vendor to have someone who's helping me do that? Restructuring my network. Maybe, Amit, you can give an example here from what we're going through, maybe something that you've experienced recently. But from my end, it's definitely something that you want to have assistance in, because you want to be up as fast as you can. And if you're working only with the people that you have at hand, it might take longer. So keeping someone at hand to be able to assist you when you need to reconfigure your network, when you need to do rollbacks to all of your different servers because you've been completely encrypted, it's something that you want to be honest about. Can I do that in a very given time? Yes or no?
Yeah, I mean, recovery is it's an art. I mean, really, it's a big plan, right? It's even a different plan specific from an IRP. It's a parallel plan, if you want, if you will. But yeah, you need to be prepared for that as well. Again, you need to understand how you can recover, which system and how long will it take you, what are the parameters that you are considering when you're deploying your backups. For instance, how long are you going to recover? How long will it take you to recover? How much data are you willing to suffer? Data loss you're willing to suffer, and so on. But these are things you need to take under consideration, but they are also key for your PCP or even DRP plans. So you need to keep that in mind. Generally speaking, I mean, we're not going to cover everything here, obviously. But yeah, I mean, I have seen organizations that have been completely owned or encrypted, and you have to jumpstart the process. You need to make sure which kind of backups do you have, and are they encrypted as well? And if so, what are you going to do? Who are the vendors you can rely on? Who you need by your side in doing that incident? So
yeah,
there are many different things to consider, and I would advise, generally speaking, to kind of separate it from the IRP, from the incident response plan, and kind of invest the time and efforts to create a very extensive recovery plan, again, which will interact with DRP and BCP and so on. And then also your priorities will be set.
Right. So we've covered the main components of a incident, let's say, from
The main consideration.
Yeah, the main consideration. But we want to be able to also address it from a procedural perspective and show you how does the plan need to look like from a very high level to be able to depict all the different stages in a way that will be constructive. So here we have this diagram that shows.
Quick note here.
Yeah.
Just a quick note. So up until this point, we kind of discussed the different considerations you need to take while thinking about your incident response plan, and of course the stages that your incident response plan should be constructed from. But now we want to kind of go back to your plan. I mean, to the template, if you will. So we started from the definitions. What is an incident? What does it mean? What are the different severities? What does the crisis mean? And kind of the principles of how we're going to address the plan. And then we discussed the stages of the plan itself, right? And now we're going back, or the next chapter will be the detailed response plan or the chart. It's kind of showing you exactly what you need to do in each step.
Yeah, and I can add here that the goal here is also to show how each stage kind of feeds off from one another. So there is a big connection naturally between the post-incident and the detect and analyze, but throughout the stages we'll see how they all connect. So your eradication is based on your containment, and your ability to recover is based on how did you eradicate. So everything is kind of intertwined. And this is a very, as you said, a very high level one. Just to show you an example, we want to be as concrete as we can in this webinar. So this is a live example of how it should look like in a very high level of a structured flow of detecting. Did I detect? Yes or no? Have I conducted an initial trigger? How did I communicate it to my stakeholders? The different stages from the detection to the containment, eradication, recovery, and post-incident. It's available on the deck. You can review it later. Of course, we won't go into the one by one, but this is just to show you a very high-level overview on how it should look like.
Yeah, and again, my take on this is that, of course, this is an example. It's just a template. You should really own it, right? You should make it your own.
Yeah.
It really depends on the organization and different stakeholders and different capabilities and different teams that you have there. For instance, my response plan chart looks a little bit different than this one. You can see the escalation path on my incident response plan and the different and when we are escalating to different teams and different managers and so on. It's all quite okay, right? I mean, it doesn't really matter as long as you know exactly what you need to do in each step, what the stakeholders who are involved, what are the key decisions that you need to make. For instance, the triage or the severity or communication, as you mentioned, public communication, and so on. So this needs to be very well outlined in the plan, and then you can pull it out of the drawer, put it in front, and you say, okay, this is what I need to do. And keep in mind that you, as the CISO or the person responsible for it in the organization, you're not always going to be there, right? You're going to have your guys, your teams on site that are going to face the problem by themselves initially. So again, they need to know exactly. They need to pull it out of the drawer and know exactly what they're going to do. So don't leave any rooms for errors there.
Completely. Cannot be a one-man game. It's always a team's game. It's always something that we're all taking together.
Yeah.
So how to best say who does what and when? We're speaking about our LASI table, which is responsible, accountable, consultant, and informed. All the different functions that you want to have, considering your different people. So we can talk about two different layers of this. We have the internal layer, which is the core, CISO, SOC, IT, and the extended, which is HR, legal, marketing, PR, C-level stakeholders, all the people that might be involved in some levels of the incident/crisis. Not always, but they are definitely someone that you want to take under consideration while preparing and while drilling. They're a part of the drilling phases completely. The second thing is escalation paths. So who goes to who? So the SOC goes to the CISO can go to the CTO, the board of directory. So we need to have very scaled, very clear paths of who goes to whom and who's owning, who has the hands on the steering wheel, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, again, take it as an example, the RASI table. You can use RASI, you can use whatever works for you. It doesn't really matter. The point B is that you need to know who are the stakeholders, what is the responsible for each stakeholders, who's responsible for what, and who should assist in which stage of the plan. And again, always bear in mind your partners, your external partners, whether it be the SOC, the forensics team, incident response, crisis management, whatever. Keep those partners as part of your RASI table or part of the roles and responsibilities, and share it with them. Okay, the plan should not only stay in the drawer, right? People should know that. People should be drilled on it. Even if it's your providers, don't forget your providers. I implore you. I've seen it so many times that people forget it and then they're stuck. Okay, so keep that in mind. And one other note, in crisis mainly, even in high-level incidents, you should usually assign a C-level sponsor who can, if there are any issues internally or something really strategically to take into account or something that you need to report to the board, have a C-level sponsoring the event, even if he's not the one who's in charge, he's not helming the incident, but he can, navigate the bureaucracy or something like that. Put that in mind and assign those responsibilities to him. So again, you as incident management or the CISO will have it when judgment day comes.
So we're going to talk about a few topics that we see as critical in terms of how does an incident occurs beyond the stages that we already showcased. A few functions or factors that we think are key to take under consideration. And the first one, Amit, is
these are actually, sorry Tom, just clarifying out something here. These are actually the chapters you should have on your plan itself.
Sure.
Right?
Yes.
Not something that it should be there. It should be documented. It should be very clear. We discussed definitions. We discussed the different stages. We discussed the detailed plan itself and the roles and responsibilities. This is, I wouldn't say a recipe or a cookbook, but it is something to guide you through what you need to take into account into your plan. So communication next. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's critical, important. So yes, as Amit said, this is one of the chapters that we wanted you to take into consideration. And the first one, I said communication, and we'll speak both internal communication and external communication. So start with internal. Setting up which channel will be the one that you'll be managing the incident is the base, because eventually something happens. I've seen an incident that something happened. The CTO and the different C-levels opened a WhatsApp group, and the guys from the IT and the SOC, they were speaking in Teams, and the guys from R&D, they spoke in Slack, and it just created something that is, you can't keep track, and you can't understand what's the full picture.
Yeah, we went in chaos.
Exactly. And when you have something that is centralized, this is where we manage incidents. Something internally that you can work with from the get-go. It will make your life so much easier. Second thing is, if you see that your organization has been breached, and maybe your channel has been breached, you need to have something that is externally available for you to have the incident managed in. So you can go there, and it can be a second channel that you have a backup channel in case something happens.
Yeah, it really depends on the type of the incident. But I would say I've seen, first of all, you need to take into account that the communication channel is an internal resource, and the attacker might be owning your network at that point, and he might be eavesdropping your channel. I actually have seen that happening. You mentioned Slack; it was on Slack, and then the attacker could have seen everything that the response team has planned and reacted to it. So keep that in mind. You can use external applications. There are a couple, and there are a few, more than few actually. Whatever works for you, just have it ready. Have the different channels ready. Have the different groups ready. Have everyone downloading those apps. Be ready for it. And also keep in mind, if you are using your internal, using your internal channel, make sure it's protected. Make sure that you control who sees the channel itself. As a precaution, of course, it's not bulletproof, but still, keep that in mind.
The next thing that we have a recommendation, this is something that we saw and believe that works best, is having a war room. So something somewhere that that all the people come together physically, discussing, sharing ideas, kind of being able to ping pong between each other and come up with solutions. It might seem, I don't know, maybe a bit obsolete or outdated, but we know and we see for a fact that it works best. People gain much more when they work physically with each other. It's a proven thing.
Yeah, that's more than true. It's kind of military oriented, but not really. I mean, guys, this is super important. If you have everyone grouped in the same room, first of all, it's you brainstorming, you're brainstorming together. It's easier to resolve conflicts and problems and issues. It just works better than do it remotely. It doesn't mean it's necessary, right? If you have many sites, and all right, then you have that, although I would consider flying to the relevant site. It's also something I would consider. But generally speaking, having a physical war room, it also creates what's the word I'm looking for? It creates a good like a bond between the different teams and different personnel, which goes on. So
Yeah, better teamwork.
that's good for your organization.
Completely. Another topic that we wanted to mention when it comes to internal communications is how do you upgrade the organization? So who does it? To what extent? Do we have preparing templates that we'll be using when we want to communicate it? So being able to know who does it, when, under which circumstances, what do we want to convey? So do we want to do it maybe after the incident and raise awareness to what happened? Do we want to guide people on something that is still going on and they might experience some backlogs or some downtime? So knowing exactly what you want to aim for with this type of communication and the templates to do so. That's the two elements that we want to stress here.
Definitely. Also, you should keep in mind what are the, I would say, prerequisites, or what are the requirements, or what are the limitations for that communication. What do you want the employees to be shared with, or to be exposed? Because if you don't want it to go public just yet, you need to take into account that once you've done it internally, you need to kind of limit asking not to disclose information, and also keep in mind that it might be disclosed anyways. So this is something you need to take into account, of course. And again, have the criteria for when I'm updating the organization. Who am I updating? Am I updating directors, or am I updating the whole of all of the organization? And why? Why? What do I want to achieve with that? Is there a chance for private information which has been leaked of those employees? And you probably need to notify them. So take those into consideration. Have the table, have the criteria, and then you know exactly what to do. And of course, as you mentioned, the time.
The last one that we want to discuss when it comes to internal communication is you have a certain topic, slight, that is breach disclosure.
Yeah.
You have to inform legal entities sometimes that you have been breached. So it's something that you need to take under consideration when you construct your strategy on how do I communicate and when. Naturally, this needs to come into play because you don't want to be in a position that you should have notified the proper authorities that you have been breached. You haven't done that. It can be a mistake. It can be with the chaos of everything, you just failed to do so. But this will be a boomerang to come back for you when you're done, because it's actually a very, let's say, grave thing to do. It's a very hard thing to do, and eventually it will haunt your organization.
Yeah, I
Unfortunately.
completely agree. You need to take it with your legal department, understand what the different legal requirements are, what are the legal requirements from your customers as well. Some of them have to be notified by contract. You might have regulations on your hand, depending on the industry and the state you are operating in. So a different consideration for that. I think even, you know what, I would consider also kind of, if it's relevant for your organization, then have a dedicated chapter for legal requirements. Again, if you are heavily regulated, then you're probably going to have to meet or have someone who understands the regulations in terms of cybersecurity incident, and see what you have to comply with. Are there any prerequisites or requirements from a legal perspective that you need to adhere to? For instance, you cannot go and move a certain server to your cloud environment because of legal requirements and so on. So if it's relevant for your organization, have a dedicated chapter for it.
Moving to the external communications, right? So as you said, Amit, you already mentioned the customers. We want to know how to communicate it to the customers if needed, depending, of course, on the legal requirements, depending on everything that we've committed to. And we've mentioned this in the past to the vendors. So people that we work with, that they need to be aware that we're in a certain situation that has certain repercussions, certain impacts that we have experienced, and they need to also be a part of that chain of informing um, to make to stop it, essentially, to be able to contain it within our borders.
Yep. Again, considering your business, the type of business that you're in, and the type of industry. If you're a hub company and you provide services to other companies via remote access or something like that, that's something you have to take into account. If you've been breached, you need to notify them. Again, we mentioned the legal requirements of customers and so on and so on. But please do take the time and invest in it, because when chaos ensues, then you're not going to be as focused as you need to be.
No, not focused at all. So moving to the last chapter we want to discuss here, how do we log the incident? So throughout the unfoldment of an incident or a crisis, naturally a lot of things happen. A lot of decisions have been made. A lot of the changes maybe have been made. How do I report it? How do I essentially log everything that is happening? Being able to predefine it and have people opening it up a certain document and say, okay, I need to do 1, 2, 3, 4 when they start conducting the activities will not save you, but will prevent you from trying to remember what happened. And usually a lot of things are forgotten, and eventually you cannot really create a postmortem, and let's say maybe a more valuable postmortem report without knowing what happened and how. So the first thing is, who reported the incident? What is the potential risk? What were the first containment actions that we've done? These are the things that we want you to have in mind when establishing your who reports the incident type of framework.
Yeah, so documentation is crucial. First of all, as you mentioned, you have to have postmortem according to it. You want to see the chain of events, what happened. There's a lot of data flowing in from different personnel. You need to keep track of all of those all of this data. So you need to have some kind of a system in place, whatever works for you. Again, some organizations Excel will do it. Some will want case management tools, and whatever works for you doesn't really matter as long as you are aware and you know you need to do so. Also take into account the fact that you might need evidence, forensic evidence, for insurance purposes or even for legal processes. So you need, if you do, then again explore that option and understand what are the requirements, and then think about how you're going to achieve that. You need to create a repository for the evidence in advance. So again, things you need to consider.
Yeah, I can say that I had experience with an organization that didn't, let's say, collect the right things at the time. The logs were deleted, run over by the time that went by, and they couldn't file for insurance, and they lost millions. And it's something that if they would have had this instruction of, guys, you need to have this, this, and that in place, you need to have these logs stored, you need to have these reports lined up, they would have been maybe able to save a large portion of their business. And it's a lot of money that is at stake. So you need to make sure that you have this, and you need to make sure that the people know how to do it, because as we said, drilling is key.
Yeah, essentially you need to remember it's your responsibility. Insurance is not going to pay if you don't adhere to their requirements. So get to know those as soon as possible.
And the last thing that we want to discuss, and it connects to everything that we spoke of, what do we document and report on each stage? And it connects to the RASI table, who needs to be informed, who needs to be consulted. So things that we want to be able to reflect as the incident or the crisis unfolds to the different stakeholders. And we won't be able to do that unless we know what do we need to document and what do you need to report on. So it's the base of being able to communicate what's going on to the broader sense of the organization, not the ones who are managing the incident, maybe in a more tactical, technical perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So last but of course not least, the post-incident procedure. Don't forget about postmortem. We discussed that already. But these are your lessons learned, right? You need to on each incident you're going to learn. You're going to make your procedures more effective. You're going to have additional technical abilities. So postmortem is super important. Make sure you're updating your plan. Make sure all of the lessons learned are implemented. Track them to resolutions. Excuse me. And don't forget it. There's sometimes there's a tendency to I finished it. Thank you. I'm going home, because you are going to work very hard doing incident. The only thing you want to do is go home. But the last phase is critical. Without it, you won't improve. Which is a basic requirement in the cybersecurity world, because attackers do not sleep, obviously, and they're always advancing. So you need to do so as well with your incident response plan.
Sure. We can maybe differentiate it into two. I mean, we can speak about two lanes. There's a tactical lane. Let's take an example. I had DNS funneling, so I need to block this port from a specific server, let's say. But we also have a strategic perspective, which is I maybe need to review my firewall policy and see what is currently being allowed. Maybe I have an over permissive firewall policy, and if I will go over just a specific server, it won't solve the bigger problem, which is my organization has a permissive firewall policy. So we need to address postmortem from these two lanes, both the tactical and the strategic. Without that, you will address things, but you won't address the root causes that created these symptoms, let's say.
Indeed. All right. So if I'm not
we
mistaken, this
wrap it up.
sums it up. Go ahead, Tom.
The first thing that we want to highlight from everything that we just spoke of is do not get caught off guard. This is a process that needs to be initiated yesterday, and it takes time, and it takes investments, and it takes concessions from different stakeholders inside the organization. And without it, as we said, as we described multiple times, you will be in a chaos that you, as a CISO or the security personnel or as a C-level type of personnel, you won't be able to contain, and you won't be able to handle. So that's the first thing.
Yep, definitely. Second, always make sure you cover all of the angles. We discussed the three pillars: people, procedures, and technology. They're relevant for all different stages, and you need to take them into account whenever you, doesn't matter which stage you are preparing or planning. Make sure that you take into account the skill set they need, the drills which are needed, the procedures to execute on the technology that you have, and of course to have the right tools for the job.
True. Number three, you need to review the different aspects of your work plan according to the stages that we discussed. How do I analyze? How do I contain? How do I eradicate? And how can I recover as fast as I can? As we described, preparing for each of these stages is beyond critical. It's something that you just won't work without it. You will be stuck either without skill sets or without abilities or without the proper technology or without an SLA that that you can reflect to your board. So this will pose you in a very problematic position.
Yes, and finally the last two, of course, test and challenge your plan, drill it, make sure everybody knows what's going on there, make sure everybody knows the plan, all the relevant stakeholders. Don't just leave it in the drawer. Make sure you communicate it to the right personnel, and then of course challenge them. Yes, drill it. Make sure that everything that you planned makes sense, is relevant for all the different systems. You are going to learn. It's a process. That's fine. Don't be alarmed if the drill was not as perfect as you planned it. That's precisely the idea behind it. Okay, this is the place you want to make errors, not during the incident.
True, and we can just maybe mention the chapter. So we described the criteria for an incident, the different levels according to the business impact, the possible scenarios. Yeah, the definitions, the possible scenarios considering your industry, considering the way you work, considering your distribution. Maybe you're global, maybe you're a very small company. So that creates different scenarios of an attack. How do you communicate? Which channels, internally, externally, everything that we mentioned. Velocity table, who is responsible, who is accountable, who's consulted, who's informed. This will get things into a certain structure that you can work with. Having a detailed plan, something that will go into the fine details of maybe referring to different playbooks, maybe referring to different elements of risk that you want to be having lined up. How do you log things? How do you keep track of what's going on? Because it's going to be very chaotic. Knowing which criteria you want to have in place. And the last thing, how do we learn? How do we create a curve that will be something that won't happen again? How can you prevent things and address them from a very root cause perspective? These are the main things that we want you to take away from this session.
Yes. Well done, Tom. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure, definitely. For questions, you can refer to our email. We'll be happy to answer anything that you have, anything that kind of popped into your head during the webinar. We're here. We'll be happy to help. Eventually, we have, I think, dozens of years of experience together, so we'll be happy to give away from that. And Amit, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. See you next time.